Well, good evening. Welcome here to another Restore Live. Restore Live on a Tuesday evening, going out live to the British Unionist People's Voice on Facebook, also to Restore Live on Facebook, and also to the Restore channel on YouTube. And as usual on a Tuesday night, Restore Live, it goes out to you live from Scotland. And I'm just going to hand you over to the host. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce both David Griffiths and his guest, Jamie Blackett.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you, Jamie. Just unmute yourself there, my friend. And I will do the hellos. So, good evening, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to what will be the final Scottish Restore UK podcast before Christmas, which is a much awaited event. And it is my great pleasure, privilege, and honour to introduce as my guest tonight, Jamie Blackett. Hello, Jamie.
Evening, David.
Wonderful to see you. So something we do, a little tradition we do on this podcast, Jamie, is we give our guests around a minute or so just to say, tell us all a little bit about yourself, what you've done and how you got involved with politics, that sort of stuff. So just a very brief intro, if you could, telling us all about yourself, please.
Well, those listening in the province, I guess quite a few people are, may be interested in that I was a soldier for the first 20 years of my adult life. I had a half career in the army. I served in Northern Ireland, in Belfast, West Belfast, and in South Armagh. And then I left the army, went home back here to Dumfries and Galloway, where I became a farmer about 20 years ago. And having farmed for about 15 years or so, I then developed a third career as a writer. I've written a couple of books, and I'm now a columnist, freelance journalist, writing columns for the Daily Telegraph, the Spectator, the Times, Country Life, that kind of thing. And I suppose it was the journalism probably that took me into, or allowed me to dip my toe into politics. I became increasingly concerned about what was happening in Scotland. You could say that I was partly radicalized on Twitter when you see what's happening behind the scenes, not the things you don't see on mainstream media. And I started writing a little bit about Scotland and thinking about Scotland, sharing my thoughts with people on Twitter and that kind of thing. And then about 18 months ago, a man named George Galloway banged on my door, and the rest is history, I guess. We together formed the Alliance for Unity. Well, he'd already started forming it, and then I joined with him and became his deputy leader, subsequently the leader of it. And we've been, as you know, David, because you were one of our candidates, we've been taking the fight to the SNP on the airwaves and in print and on podcasts like this ever since.
Absolutely, indeed. So yes, I've mentioned you a couple of times on here in the past, Jamie, just talking about All for Unity as we became. And Jamie was in fact the party leader throughout the election campaign this year, or certainly from the latter part of the campaign. For those of you who maybe weren't too au fait with what we did. But the idea of All for Unity, as I've said on here before, was that we would try a two-pronged approach. One was to try to persuade the main pro-UK parties in Scotland to at least form some measure of working together as an alliance to try to win constituency seats, and we weren't successful in that at all because they just wouldn't play ball. There was a tiny element of tactical voting on behalf of the voters, not led by the parties. And the second part was that we stood ourselves as candidates in the regional list, or the second vote as it's called. And weren't massively successful at that either, but we did land a lot of blows on the nationalists, and it's a campaign I was very proud to participate in, I should say. And Jamie was the front man. He appeared several times in the media. Still does. You've been on GB News a couple of times, haven't you, Jamie?
Yeah, been on GB News a few times, and still writing a bit about Scottish politics. I do write a lot about rural affairs as well, rural politics, farming, and that kind of thing.
Yep, terrific.
But yeah, still editors are still very much asking me to write about what's going on in Scotland. We're living in a very interesting time. I think we're really seeing the sturgeon bandwagon stalling quite badly at the moment.
I quite agree. Yes, I agree. I think we're seeing some. I wouldn't say we're near the end, but I think what we are seeing is the beginning of the end, possibly, particularly with today's announcement. For the benefit of those of you who maybe haven't heard, Sturgeon has yet again gleefully put Scotland into some form of lockdown today. She has announced that yet more restrictions will apply to public gatherings. All of the major Hogmanay New Year's Eve gatherings have been postponed, have been cancelled, won't take place. It's also permeated into football stadiums and rugby and any sporting stadium, in fact. So Boxing Day is a huge day in Scottish sport calendar. It's the day when all the husbands get to go out to football after having looked after the wife and the children over on Christmas Day. So that's cancelled now. The maximum number of people which will be allowed into football ground or any public gathering is now 500, whereas 50,000 people would have turned up at Ibrox on Sunday, for example. So this is what's happened. She said this yet again that we've got to do this because of Omicron. I suspect an awful lot of people have more or less reached the end of their tether with the imposition of these arbitrary measures by Ms. Sturgeon, and I think Jamie made a brilliant point at one stage in the campaign when he said that Nicola Sturgeon had managed to shut all of Britain's pubs, which not even Hitler managed, but now they've done it again, or they're trying to do it again. So really, I think Jamie's absolutely right here. I think that there is only so far you can go with having this nanny state and all these measures imposed on a people. And I think people genuinely, I think the electorate will start to turn against her. I think the cards are beginning to stack up against her, in as much as Alba are finding some purchase with the pro-nationalist voters. And we are seeing more and more evidence that Sturgeon's henchmen and women are just laughably, pitifully incompetent and not able to do the job. And this idea that they could be pushing right now at a time when everything is shutting down, and they're saying we must look at ways that we can save money. Well, try saving on your idiotic, completely fake attempts to have a second independence referendum if you want to save money. So I'm hoping very much that Jamie's right. But that's do you believe that that's what's happening, Jamie? Would you say we're beginning to see people starting to turn against Sturgeon and against the SNP in your view?
I think that's right, and there was a very good article today. I don't know if you've read it in Think Scotland. Professor Jill Stevenson.
I saw it indeed. She sent it to me. Yep.
Yeah, who's sort of analysed in her characteristically academically rigorous way what's going wrong for the nationalists at the moment, and it is partly that they haven't really achieved anything in the last 7 years since Sturgeon took over from Salmond. Everybody can see that public services are getting worse in Scotland, not better, and Scotland is becoming a very divided place. And critically, I mean, that was part of their plan, really, I suppose, was to divide and rule Scotland and stoke up sectarianism, what we've called Ulsterisation in Scotland. But we've now got real divisions within the nationalist movement. There are the sort of high-minded nationalists like Craig Murray and Robin McAlpine, and the Reverend Stu Campbell, if you can call him high-minded, of the Wings website, who are really disgusted by what's been going on, I think, with the SNP corruption and their failure to really deliver on anything. I mean, they haven't got Scotland any closer to independence or separation, I should say. Really, I wouldn't see it as any form of independence. And I think those divisions are really starting to show now. But unfortunately, I mean, we are stuck with these people now for the next 4 years, come what may. And they are. I mean, the Scottish Tory Party were crowing about the fact that they had prevented the SNP from getting an outright majority. I'm not quite sure whether they can really claim that much credit for that. I mean, it was I think everybody on the anti-nationalist side was, doing their bit. But I mean, it was a pretty Pyrrhic victory because, well, first of all, it wasn't a victory at all. It was a resounding defeat. But also, I mean, having the Greens in coalition with the SNP is really very much worse than what went before. They have this extreme woke agenda.
Yeah.
They are even more closely aligned to Sinn Féin than the SNP, if that's possible. I think Patrick Harvey is very much in the sort of Glaswegian Republican tradition. Yeah. And, we've now probably got 4 years of bizarre legislation to cater for various minority tastes. There will be all sorts of woke things coming down the line on school curricula and that sort of thing. And so, Scotland remains a very unhappy place. But I think, there is some cheer for the fact that the nationalists are really starting to fight amongst themselves. And you and I and others will no doubt be trying to stir things up and draw attention to that, so that the SNP's sort of cult, their core vote of about 30% of the population of Scotland who seem to want to vote for them, come what may. I think they may see the scales hopefully will start to fall from their eyes. I mean, they're not going to listen to criticism of Nicola Sturgeon from me necessarily, probably not at all. But they may actually listen to what Salmond and his followers in Alba are saying about the SNP. And I think there are so many things that are going to catch up with them now. So many scandals, so many court cases. They can't carry on kicking them into the long grass forever, one would hope. The Scottish judiciary, still hasn't been completely taken over by the nationalists. And, the press, they've managed to bribe pretty well, I would say, from the sidelines here, that during COVID, the weight of money being spent on advertising in newspapers and in broadcasters, which has kept a lot of media outlets afloat, I think, probably. I mean, that is bound to have had effect on editors, but I mean, that's not going to last forever. There are, a lot of journalists who I think are very frustrated, probably, that they're not being allowed to say things. Some of their more acerbic lines are being edited out in a lot of newspapers, not the Daily Mail, I don't think, and not some of the others, but certainly BBC Scotland, STV, and some of the Scotland-only newspapers, the Herald and the Scotsman and so on, have been pretty muted in their criticism of the SNP. But I don't think that will last forever. And I think that there may come a tipping point, as has always happened with any sort of regime that eventually runs out of steam and their misdeeds catch up with them. There'll suddenly be a tipping point where a lot of people who have been sort of soft nationalists, they've been, sort of gone along with the SNP or even supported the SNP because it's suited them for careerist reasons. They may suddenly start to leave in their droves and start pointing the finger. So I think we're in for a very bumpy 4 years, really, and a wounded Sturgeon and an SNP needing to bolster its core support is going to be a very dangerous thing. It's going to, likely to be all sorts of assaults on, particularly on the rural way of life. From my point of view, I mean, they've having done nothing about hunting, and the rural society is just carried on within the law that was made in 2001 on fox control. Suddenly these things are being revisited, and it's partly to appease the Greens, and partly just to throw a bit of red meat to their supporters in Glasgow and Dundee, where obviously a lot of rural pursuits are are not happening. So
absolutely right. Well, yeah, you touched on so many things there. Just to go back to a couple of them. One phrase which I may have used on here in the past, I can't remember. The one phrase that I'm seeing a lot these days from guys like Wings, Jaggett, these guys, the very extreme online pro-nationalist supporters. The line they keep using is, there is no independence movement, there is simply an independence industry. And I think that's very appropriate, because you see this, and Jamie will back me up here, I'm sure. You see in Holyrood, you have this absurd pantomime, as you do in Westminster to an extent also, of the SNP MPs will stand up and spout this nonsense about how Scotland would be far better off independent, and the opposition MPs or the government MPs, ruling government in Westminster, immediately just contradict them. And you're just seeing this over and over and over again. And it suits the SNP fine to stay in power. They're not going to give up power willingly, even if they didn't think that they had any path to a second referendum, which I don't believe they do. They would still do this. And the opposition MSPs, especially in Holyrood, are quite content to play this role of being the debunkers and the guys decrying the nationalist government and say, "Oh no, this is ridiculous. You're not managing Scotland correctly," and they're perfectly happy to play that role. And this is what I just wanted to ask you about this. The great frustration for me in the lead up to May's election was that it appeared that we, All for Unity, were trying harder to have Douglas Ross elected as First Minister, or possibly Anna Sarwar, than the Conservative and Labour parties were, respectively. They were more than happy to be both those parties were content to be the largest party in opposition to an SNP government. And that absolutely bewildered me. I just couldn't believe that these guys could be so irresponsible. And we did a lot of stuff. I may have touched on this in the past. We wrote to MPs in London, Westminster MPs, and we tried to say to them, look, you've got to head off this constitutional nightmare that is about to engulf the country if what is likely to happen actually does happen, and if the SNP get another large majority. They didn't get a large majority, but they near enough did. They're only one seat short, and of course they've got the 8 Green seats now, so they are a de facto coalition government with a majority now. Yeah. But we did see this, and I think Jamie, I just really welcome your views on this. My frustration was that the Conservative Party in Scotland just wanted, by the end, to maintain their own presence in Holyrood at the expense of possibly maybe more representatives of other pro-UK parties getting in. And they very much circled the wagons and said, no. If you guys are going to make inroads into our numbers, then we're going to attack you. And they did, and they attacked us really vehemently, vindictively attacked All for Unity. We saw Stephen Daisley every 2 days. He rewrote the same article, beseeching people not to vote for George Galloway's party and not to vote for any of us. What are your memories of what happened in the election in terms of the Conservative and the pro UK parties and how they interacted with us, with you, Jamie?
Well, rather like you, David. I mean, I think going back to your original point about the SNP, when it's an independence being an industry rather than anything else, a vocation. I think the entire political class in Scotland came out of that election very badly. I think. I mean, it's been obvious, I think, for some time really, that for Sturgeon's SNP, it's been much better for them to drag the thing out, to travel angrily towards Skexit than actually for Skexit to happen, or at least the referendum to happen.
Yeah.
Which would probably be the worst thing for them. I mean, I'd be very surprised if they would win it, and if they lost it, particularly if they lost it by an even bigger margin, which is quite possible, that would be the end of them. And you have to remember that a lot of these people, and this actually unfortunately goes for quite a lot of the unionist parties as well. A lot of these MSPs are not terribly employable doing anything else. I mean, one or two of them are, have had successful careers doing other things, or indeed, still have successful careers. But quite a lot of them, and I would probably count Douglas Ross in this category, actually. Who've only ever been in politics. They've never really achieved very much in other walks of life. I mean, we now have a generation of politicians who, and this has been obviously the case for some time, but never did national service, for example. When we were growing up, most of the politicians we think of in the Thatcher cabinet, for example, a lot of them have actually fought in the war.
That's right.
And people like Willie Whitelaw,
yeah.
And then for some time afterwards, they had all at least done national service, and there was much more of a tradition in those days, I think, of people going into politics in midlife, having done other stuff, having raised a family, or been in the army or the police, or doctors, or farmers, or whatever. And politics was something that that people did in middle age. I mean, it's a very recent thing. This, I suppose you could go back to the days of Pitt the Younger, but I mean that was, then we were talking about a sort of oligarchy of privileged young men. I mean, that certainly for the last century or so, since universal suffrage and the modern politics, we've generally politicians, with very few exceptions, have had pretty good experience of life before going into Parliament. We've now got all these people who've really done very little other than politics. They've probably read politics or PPE or something at university. Then they've become SPADs or lobbyists or something, perhaps done a bit of journalism at most. And then, hey presto, they're in politics. And then if they lose their seats, they don't really have very much to fall back on, unless they are exceptionally talented and get snapped up to be sort of chat show hosts or something like that. The chances of some of these people being invited to be directors of companies or going back to a successful legal career or whatever is pretty remote. So what came across to me at that election was that there were just a lot of people who actually all seemed pretty similar. Actually, the only thing really that divided them was whether they were pro the union or nationalist.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the Labour Party and Tory Party and Liberal MSPs are all pretty similar people with probably pretty similar social democratic views. Actually, I mean it just seems rather ridiculous, really, that they carry on as these three legacy parties from pre-devolution days. I mean, I think they would really, frankly, be much better just to form a new anti-nationalist party, at least for the time being. And the separatist counterparts. I mean, their sort of foremost concern really seems to be just keep hanging on to their jobs.
Absolutely, absolutely right.
And in stark contrast to all of us who are, has to be said, rather amateur and perhaps amateurish in some cases in our approach to the election. But we were at least, mostly people who had other things that we were doing and other lives and sort of hinterlands and past careers and things like that. And for most of us, actually, being an MSP would have been a great honor and a privilege, but in many ways, probably a step backwards in our careers, and something that possibly some of us could have done without, really. But and so you had this professional political class who I think really came out of it very badly, because they seem to be fighting really on you remember all this sort of statistical analysis. So if you don't vote for us, then this will happen, and all the rest of it.
That's right.
There were no big ideas. I still don't know what Douglas Ross or Anna Sarwar or the other chap actually really want for Scotland. They don't seem to have much vision. There's nothing to fire anybody up. The voters have a menu of three very similar parties, and there are no doubtless very good constituency MSPs and some not so good, and so personalities come into it. But I think there needs to be for real change to happen in Scotland. We actually need people who are of rather higher caliber, a bit more experience of life, to actually engage in politics. I think because the result has been a foregone conclusion, really, for the last decade or so. A lot of people have been turned off the idea of going into politics because they just think, well, what's the point? And this is sort of left the arena to people who are just frankly in it for the money, who are there because they get a good rate of pay for what they do, very well paid actually for what they achieve, good pension plans and all that kind of thing. And I think that has to change.
Yes, indeed. Just to echo a number of things you said there, Jamie. It's amusing. I remember one accusation that was levelled regularly at George Galloway, our colleague, was he's only in it for the money. And you think, my God, you obviously know nothing about George Galloway.
Yeah. I mean, George would have had to had he got into Hollywood. It would have cost him a fortune in lost income from all the other stuff that he does, the broadcasting and the journalism. But people were saying that because for most politicians in Scotland, sadly, that is I think that is true. I think they are largely in it for the money, and I think the SNP. I mean, whether some of the more intelligent ones genuinely think that Scotland would be better off severed from the rest of the UK, I don't know. I mean, they're so cynical, these people, that possibly a lot of them may not. But I mean, they're certainly very happy to kick the can down the road for as long as possible and carry on earning their money and getting voted back in on for what their supporters is a sort of hope that one day there'll be an independent Scotland, but it wouldn't be very independent for long because we'd be run out of money in no time at all, and have to be in somebody's pocket.
Absolutely right. Absolutely. Yeah, this is a topic I've touched on several times in some of the podcasts I've done on here and on other channels. Looking back, the huge frustration was during the campaign, you had guys who were the constituency candidates in quite high-profile constituencies, and in addition, a lot of these guys were the lead candidate on the list, or maybe the second candidate on the list. And these guys, like, I'll name one, Murdo Fraser. Murdo Fraser was going out saying, both votes Conservative, you've got to give both votes Conservative. And he was saying this in the full knowledge that it is impossible for both your votes for the same party to count in full. Yet he was telling people, you must do this. And the only reason he was doing this was because it was a safety net for him personally. Yeah. If he didn't get in the constituency, if enough people voted for him in on the regional list, then he'd get in by the back door, and that's what happened. But the downside of that is, and this is a statistic I will never tire of repeating, 1,170,000 pro-UK constituency votes were lost and wasted by being given to losing Conservative, Labour and Liberal Democrat candidates. And that's more people than voted for the SNP. It's an absolute scandal that these people could take the votes of their would-be electorate and just toss them aside. It was quite scandalous. And I've told you the story about when I was at the count, and one of the Conservative MSP said to me, oh yeah, as soon as you guys started polling at 4%, we looked at all the people that were knocked out, so we had to just change from attacking the SNP to starting attacking All for Unity instead. And that's just the farcical thing about it. And I know that the viewers in Northern Ireland will this will strike a chord with them. The idea that you've got pro-UK parties battling like rats in a sack against each other is just absolutely insane.
Yeah,
you touched on it there, Jamie. That it's like they're going back to the days of the red, blue, and whatever colour, orange, the Liberal Democrats are, forgetting the fact that 50% of the vote almost is guaranteed to go to another party, whom they're ignoring, like the gorilla on the sofa. Absolute ludicrous nonsense, and it can never be allowed to happen again. So what do you think might happen differently if All for Unity, that is, get to act as an agent for change? And how do you, just before you answer that, are you able to tell the viewers about what you see as the way forward for All for Unity from here after the experience of May's election, Jamie?
Well, we've now got a period where we can rethink things. There is no point in carrying on with the sort of attritional warfare that we were doing up until May. We might as well, this is a sort of military expression here, kind of break contact with the enemy, regroup, and try something new. I think we had this mantra. It was George's mantra that trying the same thing time and again and expecting a different result, is sort of Einstein's definition of madness. And we would be ignoring our own advice if we just carried on doing that. And that's why, we don't really want to become like the Richard Tice's party and just popping up at every possible opportunity and annoying everybody. If we're going to actually build consensus on the pro-UK side in Scotland, I think it's better that we don't do that for the time being. I mean, there's nothing to stop us doing it again in future if we decide that's what we need to do. We could, for example, we only stood on the list, which the other three parties conveniently forgot. I mean, we could have stood against them in every constituency and had people on the list as well. I mean, we had enough candidates to do that, but we did say to them, look, you focus on the constituencies, we'll be on the list. And we thought that it would make them work harder to win constituencies. But unfortunately, as you just said, it had the opposite effect. We never in a million years thought that they would adopt such defeatist campaigns. That, you know, they literally spent all their energies fighting us rather than the SNP, just to hang on to those list seats. So in that sense, it was rather counterproductive. I mean, I don't think that, you know, the outcome would have been very different, and it, you know, it did allow us to. A lot of people said that we got things stirred up a bit, got the media a bit more ballsy about life, and the opposition parties had to work harder as well, and there was less sort of appeasement as a result, possibly. But yes, I mean, unfortunately, our strategy kind of backfired in a way because they had this mad, you know, both main parties had this sort of both votes Tory or peach vote Labour or whatever it was, you know, and you know, it was clear that all they were really doing was trying to come second.
Yeah.
Nobody was really interested in winning, apart from us. I mean, we just wanted to get rid of the SNP. We didn't really care who you know, what the composition was of Holyrood, unless provided it was, you know, there were more unionists than nationalists. What we were trying to achieve.
Absolutely.
So I don't know. So you know, we've said for the time being that we will be a political organisation rather than a political party. So there's no point in anybody attacking us, and we're not going to be standing in council elections or by-elections or anything like that. No. But we are going to carry on with our research. We're coming up with ideas. You know, we came up with several big ideas during the campaign, if you remember. We had various reforms that we suggested for Holyrood, but just slim it down and make it just into a legislature. You know, we came to the conclusion that Scottish law was really best made in Scotland. There's not much appetite for having it made anywhere else, but that you know, a lot of the sort of executive functions could be stripped out and just give it back to councils. You know, there should be sort of further devolution right down to the regions in Scotland. We also came up with this big idea, which was particularly something that I was the main sort of proponent for, I suppose, was the Clarity Act.
Yes.
To try to kill Indy Ref 2 stone dead by persuading Westminster to actually set the conditions. And this is something that was done successfully in Quebec. There's never been a referendum in Quebec since, and I don't think there's much of a separatist movement in Quebec these days because of they have a Clarity Act. And if we did that, and it could be something that could be UK wide, could be in province, could be in Wales as well, to say, look, we are the United Kingdom. People do not secede from the United Kingdom on a whim. It's something that there has to be very clear rules about, and there has to be really quite a high barrier. I mean, it's as George said, it's pretty hard keeping a country together, i.e. the United Kingdom together, when there are large minorities of people who don't want to be in it. But think how difficult it would be to set up new countries when, certainly in Scotland, in large parts of Scotland, probably 60% of people have voted to remain British.
Absolutely right.
And so, you know, there's this business of Indy postcode lottery. You know, we believe that different regions of Scotland should have a two vote. It should be two votes, a second people's vote, which is what Nicola Sturgeon wanted for Brexit. So if in Dumfries and Galloway we woke up the morning after the referendum to find that most of the people or a majority of the people in Dumfries and Galloway had voted to stay part of the UK, but because of the demographic imbalance of the population of Glasgow and Dundee, that they had somehow got separation over the line. We were going to be dragged out of the UK against our will. That there would be enshrined in law. There would be a second vote. We'd have an opportunity to vote again as a region. Probably the Borders and North East Scotland would be in the same boat, and Orkney and Shetland. And we would have a second vote, either to ratify Skexit or to say, right, that's it. We're not coming with you. The border is going to be redrawn back to where it actually was until relatively recently, probably up until sort of Norman times. Most of the borders would have been in Northumbria, and southwest Scotland was actually part of was in with Cumbria, and it was a separate kingdom. There's no historical right for something called the state of Scotland to exist, because it's a relatively modern construct. Put together from separate, autonomous principalities and kingdoms. And so, we would probably go back to that and find that the south of Scotland was a devolved part of the United Kingdom. Perhaps with a capital in possibly in Edinburgh, because I can't see Edinburgh as really a unionist city.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, what the viewers in Northern Ireland may not realise is that in the 2014 independence referendum, it was only the cities of Glasgow and Dundee that voted narrowly for independence. Every other city and region in Scotland, bar none, apart from Glasgow and Dundee, which are the two areas, incidentally, with the highest incidence of Irish Republican demographics. These are the only two areas which voted for independence. So the idea that people in, say, Orkney and Shetland and the Western Isles and Dumfries and Galloway can be told this is what you've got to do by voters in Glasgow and Dundee, and that's absolutely the antithesis of democracy right there. You can't have that. So we're this is why we guys like Jamie, me, George, all of us, we are all so adamant that what is happening in Scotland is subverting democracy, and so we can't possibly allow this to happen. Now, we don't actually believe that the SNP do stand a chance of even having a referendum anytime soon, far less winning it, because we don't believe they would win it. But nonetheless, the problem as we see it, and again, I've touched on this, is that in the meantime, you've got this constitutional stalemate. So you've got in Westminster, you see that odious toad, Ian Blackford, every week standing up in Prime and PMQs, and his second question is always something about when Scotland's independent, things will be better, and all this nonsense. And you see this complete debacle in Holyrood every week as well, where Sturgeon keeps pushing the case for independence. Kate Forbes, that bizarre young woman who's history and diaspora studies graduate, and she's now the finance secretary of Scotland, presenting. It's just unbelievable, and she keeps presenting these figures which are total fiction. And Mike Russell, who's now the chairman of the party, says, "Oh yes, of course, Scotland subsidises the rest of the UK." I mean, how can you say something like that with a straight face? It's just such. It's like saying Kirkcaldy subsidises Edinburgh. It's just a ridiculous statement. It just means nothing at all. But this is what these people do, and so we're seeing patent untruths from these people, and so we can't allow the people of Scotland to be lied to by a bunch of fanatics who have this crazy notion that somehow Scotland's going to be free, independent. And Jamie touched on a point I've made many times. It's not independence at all. It's breaking the country apart. Scotland is already an independent country in as much as Scotland is part of the United Kingdom, which is an independent country. There is no union. There is no union. The union has taken place historically. What you have now is a country, and that country is made up of 4, albeit ancient kingdoms and all the rest of it, but not any longer. No more so than the ancient kingdom of Cumbria or Wessex. These aren't countries. These aren't kingdoms anymore. They were once. They're not now.
Yeah.
Cornwall, all these places. We are part of this one landmass and this one entity, and it's just ludicrous that all of this subversive nonsense is being brought to the fore all the time with a historical sense of grievance and resentment. And it's just classic nationalism, neo-nationalism is what I called it throughout the campaign, because as far as I'm concerned, that's what it is, because these people are not nationalists in the true sense of the word, because, again, as a point I've made several times, the SNP is, in itself these days, today's SNP is an alliance of very disparate groups and views, united in one common aim, which is the breakup of the United Kingdom. Now, that is not what the people of Scotland believe. I cannot accept that. No matter how many of these of the electorate vote for them, I don't believe they want independence. I genuinely don't believe they do. And so we have seen, I mean, but I've talked again about this many times, Jamie, you're seeing pretty much the same people en masse who voted Labour until 2010 are now voting SNP in almost the same numbers. And as one has gone down, the other's gone up. So where the Labour were on 40 odd seats and the SNP were on 2 or 3, now it's the other way around. The SNP are on 40 odd seats and Labour on 2 or 3. That's not for any other reason than the fact that the people who were previously voting Labour are now voting SNP. That's it. It's as simple as that, really. So what do you see as the way forward? What do you think we could do if we could persuade Boris Johnson or whomever is going to be leading the Conservative Party and the country next year, if Boris keeps making these blunders, what do you think we could do to try and persuade them to change things? Do you think a Clarity Act, have you had any traction on that, for example? Have they come back to say, in any discussions you've had, has anyone said to you, yeah, that's a great idea, we must investigate that?
Yeah, I think people in Whitehall do think it's a good idea. I mean, the trouble is, you know, the Conservative Party are obsessed with short-term poll movements.
Yes,
and they seem their policies seem to be driven by the last focus group that they sat in on, and they you know, they say, well, we don't, you know, the trouble is if we're too hard on Sturgeon, then, you know, people don't like it, and it drives people into the arms of the SNP. And my response to that is, you know, okay, you know, if we were weeks away from an election, then that sort of thing matters. But we're not. We're 4 years away from an election in Scotland, and 3 years away from a Westminster election.
that's right.
And you know, so now actually is the time to do this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you know, I think there's just too much appeasement. You know, it happened. I mean, in 2014, David Cameron won the referendum. I mean, if you're a sort of journalist trick of sort of personalizing these things. I mean, he didn't win it, but the United Kingdom won it, really. But I mean, he was in charge, and the very next day, I mean, you know, there was sort of appeasement. They were given extra right. I mean, they were allowed to call themselves a government. I mean, that was a classic error in my view. Because you know they then started giving themselves fancy titles and, you know, talked about cabinet and all this sort of thing. You know, I mean it, and I think that they need to actually say enough is enough. We've given away too much already. If anything, post-COVID, budgets are going to be very, very tight. There are going to have to be some very, very difficult decisions made between, you know, hospitals and schools and defence and, you know, all these things. And actually the cost of government in Scotland is far too high now. I mean, we're paying for 3 tiers of politicians. I mean, once we came out of the EU, you know, arguably we got rid of we did get rid of a 4th tier. Not that I actually voted for it. I was a kind of reluctant Remainer, but I mean, that was in my book. That was one of the good things we did in Brexit. But we are left with 3 tiers of politicians in Scotland, where previously we only had 2 originally.
That's true.
Local councils and Westminster, and we've got to. I think there's got to be a fairly rigorous approach taken to asking where Holyrood adds value to people's lives. And we're paying these people a lot of money to be there. It takes up an awful lot of Scotland's intellectual energy gets sapped. You and I could be, if we weren't here talking about Holyrood, we could be out there starting businesses or writing books or
absolutely
whatever. So this sort of period of navel gazing that we've had in Scotland has not been terribly productive. It hasn't been productive at all, actually. Holyrood, may have added value in some ways, perhaps, but has definitely detracted value in others. And there needs to be a serious conversation about the devolution settlement and whether it's actually really what we want, whether we've done any good. I mean, I think the flip side of having another independence referendum has to be whether a referendum to actually really whether we want to continue with this experiment in partial self-government, which seems to me to have been a complete disaster.
Absolutely.
And I think Tories. I'm saying that because I was a Tory until they expelled me. I think Tories need to be more robust about having these discussions about certainly about having a Clarity Act, which would just lay down the law, really, literally, right? This is now the law. If you, of course, we're not a totalitarian state in the UK. If a genuine majority of people, not the 31% that we had in May, genuine majority of people in Scotland, spread across all regions of Scotland, really want to leave the UK, then they must be allowed to do it. There has to be a mechanism for allowing that to happen. But equally, there has to be mechanisms to safeguard people like you and me who would be dragged along on this excursion against our wishes. And I mean, fair enough if there was we've covered this already, but if there's a local majority, then fine. But so I think there's 2 examples of what I think Boris and his and Gove and Alistair Jack and people should be focusing on, really, is a more robust dealings with the SNP, and we've been pressurising for that to happen. And there are signs that it is happening. I think they're now bypassing Holyrood more often and giving money directly to where it's needed. They're holding. Well, they haven't done very much about it, really, but I mean they're making noises about holding Holyrood to account. Ben Wallace made a very good speech the other day about the fact that the British Army is there as a last resort. If the SNP need to get their act together and get the whole service things working properly, instead of just relying on the army to come and sort it out.
Quite right.
And the Auditor General has just been quite robust in his criticism of the SNP's finances. So there are signs that the establishment, the Sir Humphreys of this world, are starting to actually man up a bit and hold them to account, because they've just been ridden roughshod over everything in Scotland, haven't they? I mean, the drug deaths, just one example, but I mean, drug deaths is important because it is absolutely the middle point of a Venn diagram where you've got shocking education, a bad health service, and just general sort of joblessness and welfareism.
Yeah,
where those three come together, right bang in the middle of that, you've got this dreadful sort of tragedy of people. So many more people in Scotland dying of drug addiction than anywhere else in the Western world, as far as I can see.
Absolutely right. That's true. When I was standing for election in the West Scotland region, I got very closely involved with some groups who were focusing on drug deaths in very unexpected places. Millport, for one. Millport, of all places. I remember being on a podcast like this in the election, and somebody said to me, "What do you think the biggest problem is in Millport?" And I said, "Well, to me, it's very obvious. It's the scandalous level of drug deaths, and it's the same in very, very affluent places. Young people getting involved with this, and it's exactly as you say. It's from a sense of hopelessness and joblessness and aimlessness, basically, and it's just awful. And the treatment of the SNP's treatment, cutting the budgets to deal with these things. I mean, that's just crazy. And also, not just drug deaths. I mean, the treatment of the elderly. I was talking to a guy who will hopefully be helping us in the new year. A guy who was previously a political journalist, and I remember talking to him at the time of the SNP white paper, where there were, I think it was a 700-page document, and he pointed out to me at the time there isn't one single mention of elderly care in this white paper. And then fast forward 7 or 6 years, as it was, to when people are dying or people are contracting COVID-19 in hospitals, and they've been moved out of hospitals after positive tests and moved into care homes where they infected old people who subsequently died. I mean, and this is a decision made by the Scottish Government. That's absolutely appalling, and I can only hope that the people who made those decisions, i.e. Jean Freeman and Nicola Sturgeon, are made to appear in criminal courts because of that, because they're effectively handing out death sentences to elderly people. Absolutely disgraceful. And this is why, one of the many reasons why guys like Jamie and I are so vociferous about all this, because it's not just the case that the SNP are not very good and they're not massively talented and they're career politicians, which they are. It's the fact that they make such utterly abominable decisions which affect people's lives so fundamentally and so and such appalling, dastardly deeds that they carry out. Drug deaths being one, care of elderly and the shocking lack of care of elderly being another. Education, as we know, policing, transport, everything is being mishandled like you wouldn't believe. Anas Sarwar, in fairness to him, at least he lands some blows, as he should, about the Queen Elizabeth hospital, which is just an absolute abomination. People have died in there of diseases caused by pigeon droppings in air conditioning units and stuff. This is absolutely dreadful. It's like something you would see in Bogota or Ulaanbaatar, not in Edinburgh. I mean, this is unbelievable. And I'm not being in any way, derogatory about those places, but this should not be happening in an advanced modern economy with all of the benefits of industrialization. It's crazy. So we normally break up after about an hour, Jamie. We've had just over an hour, and it's been an absolute joy to me to be able to talk to you. This is what Jamie does. He could talk at the drop of a hat about all of these issues with great aplomb and with great knowledge. He's a terrific guy, and really look him up on Twitter because he regularly lands blows on the SNP and the Nationalists better than anyone else on our side, if you like. Terrific. So just wanted to say that, Jamie. Absolutely heartfelt and meant.
Well, it's fine to say that, though. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'll wrap up shortly. Is there anything you'd like to say just before we go? Any predictions for the coming year? What do you think might happen? Just as the next step, anything you would like to see happen or anything you think might be a feature in the coming months and maybe the coming 12 months? Anything you can think of at all?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if I had a crystal ball, I think if we were having this conversation a year's time, I'd be very surprised if Nicola Sturgeon is still there.
Yeah.
As First Minister. I think the signs are she's looking for a golden parachute out of Scotland, rather like Ruth Davidson, if I'm going to be even-handed about it. These career politicians are, they once they see their career in politics is not going to get any further, they're quite keen to find a well-paid sinecure somewhere else. And it was very evident at Glasgow. We were all sniggering about Elsie McSelfie.
That's it.
Having selfies with just about anybody she could find at Glasgow, with or without a mask.
Yep. True.
With or without social distancing. And that was all about, sucking up to Justin Trudeau, or whoever it happened to be, to try and get a job on some international quango, probably the UN or one of these climate change organizations or something. So that I think that would be my prediction, that she has basically had enough. I mean, she seems very, very tetchy, angry, short-tempered, and I think she knows she's not going to lead Scotland to the promised land.
Nope.
And I think she just wants to probably get out with as much dignity as she can intact, and go and earn some money somewhere else. Quite interesting that we haven't seen her husband at all lately.
No.
That must be hanging over her, a criminal investigation, it seems, allegedly. I mean, there have been announcements by Police Scotland that they are carrying out an investigation into the missing 660,000, I think it is, isn't it, from the SNP funds?
That's right. These are funds.
There is all that. I hesitate to say to look forward to, but there's going to be, there is going to be an interesting time ahead for the SNP, because they can't carry. I mean, whatever happened to Margaret Ferrier, for example?
Yeah, absolutely.
There are all these court cases that are stacking up, and sooner or later, Police Scotland and the judiciary are going to get their act together, and there will be some pretty embarrassing moments for the SNP in the year ahead. So my prediction is, I think that she's probably on the way out. I guess that Agnes Robertson, as George calls him, is the anointed one. But I don't know. I mean, there will doubtless be. I think the famous SNP discipline is likely to fall apart when that happens, and you've got Alba heckling from the sidelines on the nationalist side, and the SNP scrabbling around trying to find another leader who's going to unite them in the way that Nicola Sturgeon did, and I think she has ruled the SNP completely through fear as much as anything.
Yeah.
I don't think many of them have much love for her, actually, but they have been ruled rather like a sort of mafia family for the last few years. So yeah, that's what 2022 has in store. On the unionist side, I guess it'd be same old. I mean, I would just love to, I think it was Professor Tompkins, wasn't it?
Yes, Adam Tompkins.
Ironically, has sort of, in a way, come out in favour of Alliance for Unity's policies without actually naming us. I think he was pretty rude about us in the election, but he's now saying exactly what we were saying, was that he would love to get Douglas Ross and Alex Cole Hamilton into a room, banging their heads together and get a united pro-union front against the SNP. I mean, and not standing against each other and all that sort of thing to get rid of them, because unless that happens, I'm afraid the never-ending goes on, and Scotland will continue just to go backwards.
Absolutely well said, Jamie. I agree and endorse everything you've said. So I made the same prediction that at the start of this year, campaigning, that this would be Nicola Sturgeon's last year as First Minister, because I think you're right. You cannot go on leading a country with threats and intimidation, which is what she's doing. We know that she is. She's intimidating businesses to fall in line with her and not to speak out. We know that they've been keeping MPs and MSPs in line by making it clear that they can't go against the party wishes. You've started seeing a number of Alba MSPs and MPs defecting to Alba. What's his name? Kenny McCaskill and the other guy. I forget his name. They've gone, and more will follow, unquestionably. Salmon fans, more will follow, and who knows what will happen. But yes, I'm optimistic. I'm not in any way despairing, because even though it might look as if they have an impregnable lead in polls and stuff, those things change very quickly. We know they do, and we will continue to put pressure on the pro-UK parties, the opposition parties, to keep challenging these guys. We'll keep landing blows through the auspices of All for Unity, or Alliance for Unity, as a political movement, and through the majority, as we spoke about, having been the meeting with them last week. We'll continue to highlight the sheer ineptitude and criminal irresponsibility of the SNP and the Greens, of course. They're woke, they're hyper woke colleagues. So to leave everybody on a positive note, I would say I think Jamie's right. I think she's maybe got 12 months, and by the end of that period, she'll either be on the way out or out completely. And I think the SNP will start to fall further in polls this year. Don't believe the hype, guys. Ever since the election, the SNP numbers in opinion polls have been on the slide, and that will continue. That's a trend that will continue. So yeah, and the idea that she's reintroduced these ludicrous hit and hope, really, I should say, measures for COVID now, with 50,000 people can't go to an outdoor football stadium, but they can all meet and congregate in pubs in numbers up to 100 instead. How does that make sense, guys? I mean, seriously. So, because today they've announced that you can't watch football matches or attend any functions in crowds of over 500. So it's closed down Scottish football for the next 3 weeks, at a time that the game simply can't afford it. And you cannot keep treating people this way just because you're incapable of controlling a virus. So awful. So Jamie, just to say again, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for telling the viewers and listeners a little bit about what All for Unity is going to be doing, or Alliance for Unity. We only called ourselves All for Unity because Alliance for Unity was our name, but the Electoral Commission wouldn't let us call it that. So you'll see more of what we're talking about in the coming weeks and months. But Jamie, it was terrific having you. It would be great if you could come back periodically and just tell us more about what's happening and what you're up to. Are you writing any books at the moment?
I am. I'm writing a book at the moment, probably coming out in the spring, I think. And I'll be covering some of this stuff in it.
Excellent. Well, we'll have you on here to tell us all about it, because that's what we like to do. Anybody who can push a narrative that is anti-nationalist and pro good sense, and anything that's anti this drift to postmodernism, which we'll talk about in subsequent discussions, which is something about which Jamie's very knowledgeable, and that's worth listening to, guys. So okay, we'll wrap up there. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you for coming on, Jamie. It's been great. I really appreciate the fact that the opportunity to have this podcast, just to tell our listeners and viewers in Scotland and in Northern Ireland and in the rest of the UK just what's happening up here, because they're worrying times, they're troubling times, but we know that that right is on our side, and that's what keeps me focused. So anyway, Jamie, have a great Christmas.
You too, David.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed. And we'll speak again in the new year. So enjoy the holiday period, and I'll raise a glass in your honour when Christmas Day arrives. So good luck with the book, Jamie.
Thanks, David.
Okay, bye. Speak to you soon. Thanks very much.
Good night.
Bye-bye, everyone. Goodbye, everyone.
There are any number of issues in Scotland that need addressing. Health, education, drug deaths, the economy, but all of those are taking a back seat at this conference to one issue above all else, and that's an independence referendum.
Scotland doesn't want a Boris Johnson government. It doesn't want to leave the European Union, and it wants to be able to determine its own future, whatever that future turns out to be. And this idea that the Tories can just say no and sort of imprison Scotland in a union against its will, I just don't think will hold.
Independence is what the SNP is all about, and Nicola Sturgeon is expected to reinforce that massively at this conference. There will be no chance for people who are against the First Minister's policies to get a hearing.